I'm Laura Cornhill. I'm the creative director at Studio Binocular. Oh, here's the photo of me as a young 2-year-old with my sister going places. I guess I never really knew that I wanted to be a designer. It's just something that kind of evolved a little bit. When I was in high school, I suppose you think about what you wanted to do. And I did work experience. I was obsessed with early 90s women's tennis at the time. And I did work experience at Tennis Magazine. And so they had all the different kind of roles that people played. And I really got into the designer role there. I guess at home we just had a daggy old Amstrad computer that you would type up assignments on and stuff like that. I don't think I even ever submitted a typeset assignment, but my sister was doing a 12, so she would do that. Anyway, and so I was really quite taken with the number of windows and colour palette tabs and things like that in this guy's particular computer, and I thought, oh, maybe that could be quite interesting. And then I also, I think as I mentioned in the interview when I was flicking through the yellow pages back in the day, which you actually used to do, there were all of the ads. Obviously most of them look pretty crappy, but then the design ones really stood out as being really nice, and in particular Sue Allnutt's company stood out, and I thought to myself, gosh, these really look a step above the rest, and maybe that could be something I could do. And so anyway, I went through the whole process of getting into uni. I went to Monash, which I really enjoyed, and then when I graduated, I went and worked at Smart Creative at the time, which was a really great job for me. I got heaps of experience on all different range of project types. I got a lot of hands-on work with clients and things like that, which I think was really valuable. And I did that for about a year and a half. And then Ben Wondersitz and I, who had studied at Monash together, we decided to set up a studio. And so we had sort of set a date that we were going to quit our jobs and start the studio. And so that day came around and I was so fucking nervous. And I went in and I quit my job, and I was so paranoid that Ben would call and then say, actually, I was just kidding. I wasn't going to quit my job, or they convinced me not to quit my job. But luckily he quit as well. And so we both started the studio together, which was really good. And our first studio space was in a kind of an office type environment in Richmond, which didn't really suit us that well at the time. We were sort of 22 or something, and we didn't really like that very much. So then we managed to find our own independent space, which was actually more like a dungeon underneath an old newsagent's. And so it kind of had one small window right up one very end, and then it was this long, thin place that was painted all black inside and had sort of broken shards of mirror on the wall. So we managed to sort of do that up a little bit, and when I say do it up a tiny bit, we put a small hot water unit in so that we could use some hot water, but the toilet door didn't close properly, so you would always have to sort of go to the toilet with your foot kind of against the door and hope that no one else would come in. And anyway, we stayed in there for 2 years. I had no heating whatsoever. I got so sick so many times, and it was chronically freezing, but we stayed in there for 2 years until we were evicted from there. So they had to really push us out. And then we found our current space, which we've been in for sort of, I don't know, like 13 years or something like that, which has lots of windows and is upstairs. So it made a nice change from the dungeon. And yeah, that's kind of where we're at.
How did you come up with the studio name?
Again, it's a very uninspiring story, I think, of us just not really knowing what to call ourselves. And Ben came up with it one day, and we thought it kind of had a nice ring to it because it's about, I guess, vision and looking into the distance and having that idea of vision. And there were two of us. It was binocular. So we kind of just went with it. Well, we did because Ben, about 7 years ago, I think Ben moved to London. And so we did work kind of in London as well for a bit, but then that was sort of hard to sustain, and he decided to stay over there permanently, so then we went our separate ways. Learning about history in any field is important. This is important in graphic design just as it is in politics or other types of social movements and things like that, because it helps you, I suppose, to realise how we've gotten to where we are today, and it helps you understand kind of references and things like that as well, I think, which is really important. Otherwise you might think that Kim Kardashian comes up with her own concepts for photo shoots and stuff like that rather than ripping off old ideas. But I think that, yeah, I suppose history gives us all a point of reference and things like that. I think probably in my career I've not so much looked at graphic design for a source of inspiration as much as kind of wider things. I'm kind of obsessed with the news, so maybe Li Lin Chin has been the source of inspiration, both from a design point of view and a news point of view. And yeah, so I kind of look to perhaps film and even kind of fashion and popular culture a little bit more than maybe specifically graphic design. Right, but there was a whole thing run by Mimo Cozzolino or something like that back in, that had a lot of colloquial Australian design. I think I would say that there's a kind of an informality to things which is uniquely Australian, I think comes from our wider social kind of approach to life. And I suppose it's always helpful to look at international trends as well. Maybe Australia does, I mean, inevitably Australia follows those just as it does in fashion and other things. But well, I guess I would preface it by saying I'm not sure that I really have given a huge contribution as much as other people on the list. But I suppose some things that we've done which have been specifically related to the industry have been things like organising the Iron Designer event, which we did for 3 years in a row as part of the State of Design Festival. It's a little while back now, but it was kind of a mock competitive kind of event that we put on where people get on stage and have 20 minutes to create something in response to a series of words or something like that. And that was really fun because we got to kind of develop the event and curate the event, and we went out and organised all the participants, and we tried to make it a really kind of cross-disciplinary event. So we would get architects and interior designers and fashion designers and things like that, and they would all battle against each other on stage. And I suppose it was really about coming up with an idea and how designers from all different disciplines can come up with ideas quickly under pressure, and having a sense of humour to it as well, I think, which I think is something which I've really been conscious of throughout my career in developing work which has a bit of a sense of humour wherever possible and has a kind of humanity to it in that point of view. I think in terms of other types of work as well, I've always tried to integrate the written word a lot into the work that I do and that the studio does, and that has allowed us to kind of have sometimes a little bit more of a personality-driven approach to the work that we do, and a more sort of holistic approach because we're able to control the message as well as the visual and looking at that as a whole. So maybe there's that. Well, I suppose I had 18 months ago I had my first child, Ivy, and that was a huge change for me, and it made me really realise the significance of what it's like to be a working mother, as much as probably people who aren't working mothers sort of go like, when it happens, you realise, shit, these people have got a lot going on, and trying to kind of integrate parenthood with running a business and things like that is a constant challenge, and I've become a lot more in awe of people who do it seamlessly and do it well. And in terms of integrating that to the studio, I suppose I've had to learn to be a lot more flexible. I've had to learn to really, time becomes your most valuable commodity, and you have to really, I've sort of changed how I work a little bit, and I've become less precious about things and make quicker decisions and all of that sort of stuff. And I suppose I've always found it inspiring to see other women who've done that, sort of like Michaela Webb and things like that, and so hopefully that does give other women, it creates an example for other women to see that it is possible to still have a family and run your own business and do all that. It's fucking hard, but it is possible. Sure. I think for me, these things are all intertwined in terms of, as the studio's matured, I've also matured, and I've had more experience, and the studio's changed in terms of the number of staff that we have and things like that. So everything's kind of intertwined. And you mentioned earlier, you were talking about how the industry has changed, and these things all kind of evolved together a little bit. So in terms of my role, I suppose when we started the studio, we were very young, and the type of work that we did was often for a lot of other small businesses, I suppose, so identities for cafes and all of that sort of stuff, and which I really enjoyed at the time. I think at each stage I've kind of enjoyed the phase that it's been at. And then as we grew a bit more mature, I suppose, we probably were able to work with clients at a slightly higher level, and that's kind of grown and grown as it's gone through. And so with that, I guess my role and responsibility has changed as well. So you kind of work more strategically with clients and things like that, and it becomes less important about some of the visual components. I mean, they're all still important, but the strategy behind how you sort of what you're communicating and things like that become more important. And so I think as the time has gone by and as the studio's grown a little bit, we put on other staff and we have other designers, and we've always just had other design staff, and it was very design driven in the studio. And that's kind of having other people working with you in that sense is a real challenge, because you have to learn to let go of some things, and that can be really hard. But in the end it helps, because your role turns into being, in some ways, a bit of a creative mentor for people in their roles, and to help to support them to make their ideas work harder and things like that. So I think that has definitely changed a lot. And for me, it changed even more when I did have Ivy, my baby, because it meant for me that I couldn't stay back till 9, 10 o'clock developing creative concepts and doing work as kind of intensely hands-on as that. And so I had to learn to sort of rely on other people, I guess, to do some of that sort of stuff. But also I found that kind of, again, that stage kind of tied into where I was at with my career and my own development anyway, where some of that nitty-gritty of getting stuff designed became less important. I still want it to be good, and I still want it to be perfect and all of that sort of stuff, but it's become less important for me to do myself, I suppose. And I get more fulfillment in a way out of kind of being able to oversee all of that and still contribute creatively to all of the conceptual direction and things like that, but then also be able to contribute more strategically for clients in terms of how we can achieve the best result for them from a communication point of view. And so that's kind of challenged me a bit more intellectually as I get older, which I think is important. And I guess that's where, to date, my career, I've always found it rewarding in that it's evolved as I've grown. Yeah, and I think that's always been one of the fears, because you sort of think to yourself, oh, what's going to happen when I get older? You know, I'm going to be 50 and my school going to be just deciding on what leading to use and stuff like that. And you sort of think, oh, I don't know if that's going to work. But to date, and I don't know how it will continue to evolve, but I suppose things do change as you get older and you find new opportunities and different opportunities. And I hope that continues. I think from a broader perspective, if we're talking about women being visible in the industry, I think there are no pitfalls to them being visible. Just like in every other industry, it's so important for women to be visible, and for us to be able to see other people like us in higher roles and in important roles in the industry. And I think that there's no pitfall to that at all. So I think that's really important. And from a personal level, I don't really feel particularly visible or invisible in a way. So I don't know if I can speak to that, but I imagine for female designers who are particularly visible that it's a great benefit for them to be visible. I think I find it hard to, in some ways, I suppose, there's a comfort in being invisible, because you can kind of go along and do your own thing and not have to worry about what other people are thinking, I suppose. I guess you can do that when you're visible as well, as Donald Trump does. But because I suppose there's a comfort in that, and if you're an introverted person, which I can be at times, I like that. But yeah, I think that I imagine from a purely business point of view, then there's no benefit in being invisible, you know. We kind of do that through this is going to sound so boring, we do that through how we scope our work out. We sort of really try and outline what our process is so that the client can understand where we're spending our time, because obviously we're accountable to them for how we spend our time, and kind of trying to highlight to them the value of spending time in a certain area, because that will add to the end result from certain points of view. But I find actually that the majority, this is again maybe going to sound bad, but the majority of our clients don't seem to question our process, or don't seem to not see value in it either. Like the majority of our clients seem to just be nice, common sense, normal people. And I suppose we do work with a lot of clients that have marketing departments and things like that. So we're often working with marketing people who would appreciate the value of that process. I imagine if you kind of were working with people who maybe were running their own businesses and things like that, then that might not be something that they would be privy to in their working life day to day. But most of the people we work with kind of have a good appreciation for what our process would be, and don't seem to undervalue that in a way. I guess a lot of the knowledge that we bring to our clients is about what makes Melbourne tick, and the social fabric of Melbourne, and we work with a lot of culture, like City of Melbourne, Fed Square, all of that sort of stuff, and all of the major unis where education is such an important part. I would say that there's probably an authenticity to it which comes through, which is reflective of the whole culture within Melbourne. I think as Melbourne's culture has shifted, I think that's been reflected through design. So say, for example, in the last 5 years, the rise of the celebrity chef and the importance that eating out has sort of played in our own social lives has really come through a lot in design, and has influenced design so heavily, because you see this kind of interplay with restaurant culture and design culture, I think, kind of coming through. And I think that's one of the things that's unique about Melbourne design as well, is probably an interface with other disciplines. And that's what makes Melbourne such an interesting place as well, is the way that, I guess, our CBD works. The way our CBD works is it's kind of not like the Sydney CBD, where it's very much a business district, and then at night and on the weekends it's like a ghost town sort of thing. Whereas in Melbourne, all of our cultural sort of stuff is also happening within the CBD. So you kind of get this interface of, I guess, creative culture with business culture with other things. And I think that makes for a really thriving design scene and wider cultural scene. And you sort of have people who are graphic designers who are also musicians, and who are kind of, you have things like Body Electric, where it's like dance combined with other sort of design movements and things like that. And so I think that plays a really important role in Melbourne graphic design and Melbourne's identity, and how Melbourne is perceived as a creative city and things like that.